On the morning of June 17th, 2025, something unusual reportedly caught the attention of the person closest to Anne Burrell. According to publicly available police records, the bed in their Brooklyn home was made in a way that felt out of the ordinary. It was a small detail, easy to overlook, but investigators would later say that detail became part of a much larger story, one involving personal writings, unanswered questions, and a moment that no one publicly saw coming. Because behind the confident presence millions recognized on television, there may have been emotions and struggles that remained completely private. And what authorities reportedly found inside that bedroom would only deepen the mystery surrounding her final hours. Anne Burrell was not just a chef, she was a personality who brought energy, confidence, and unmistakable passion to television. As a longtime star on Food Network and the host of Worst Cooks in America, she built a career helping others transform their skills and often their confidence. Her signature laugh, her unmistakable voice, her unmistakable spiky blonde hair. These weren't just visual traits, they were part of an identity that viewers trusted and connected with for years, which is why the events of that June morning, according to official reports, came as a shock not only to fans, but reportedly even to those closest to her. According to a police report referenced by investigators, Anne's husband, Stuart Claxton, noticed something unusual early that morning. The bed reportedly had been made, something he allegedly told authorities was not typical behavior for that time of day. At first glance, it may have seemed insignificant, but moments later, the situation reportedly escalated into something far more serious. Claxton discovered Anne unresponsive in the bathroom and immediately contacted emergency services, according to publicly available information. First responders arrived quickly, but despite those efforts, authorities later confirmed she had passed away. And at that point, the focus shifted from emergency response to understanding what happened. Investigators began examining the home, searching for context, not assumptions, not speculation, just facts. And during that process, according to police documentation later referenced in media reports, investigators reportedly found personal writings in the primary bedroom. Among them was a note dated the same morning. They also reportedly discovered journal entries that authorities believed reflected deeply personal thoughts. Now here's what makes this moment even more complex. According to Claxton's own statements to authorities, he reportedly said Anne had never previously spoken about harming herself and had not shown outward signs that would suggest something like this could happen. That detail matters, because it highlights something experts often emphasize. Public perception and private reality are not always the same. From the outside, Anne's life appeared full, professionally successful, recently married, and still actively connected to her audience. In fact, her relationship with Claxton had begun just a few years earlier, after the two met on the app Bumble in 2018. Their connection reportedly grew quickly, leading to their marriage in October 2021. By all outward appearances, she was building a new chapter, which raises an important question. How does someone who brings so much visible energy to others carry their own emotional world? This is where the timeline becomes especially important. Authorities confirmed that emergency services received a call that morning concerning an unresponsive individual. Law enforcement secured the scene and began standard investigative procedures. Initially, officials did not immediately announce a definitive cause. Instead, they followed a careful process, reviewing evidence, conducting examinations, and waiting for medical analysis. Weeks later, the official findings were released. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office determined that Anne Burrell's death was the result of acute intoxication involving multiple substances, according to publicly released reports. Authorities officially ruled the manner of death as suicide in July 2025. It's important to understand what that means in investigative terms. It reflects a conclusion based on medical evidence, toxicology results, and scene investigation, not assumptions or speculation. And yet, even with that official ruling, the emotional impact of the loss extended far beyond the report itself. Because Anne Burrell wasn't just a public figure, she was a wife, a sister, a daughter, a stepmother, and someone whose presence had shaped millions of everyday moments through television screens, kitchens, and shared experiences. Her family later released a statement describing her as someone whose smile could light up a room and whose warmth reached people, far beyond those she knew personally. But even with those words, one question continued to linger quietly in the background. Not about the investigation, not about the official findings, but about something deeper. What was Anne Burrell feeling in the days and hours before that morning? Because sometimes the most important parts of a person's story aren't the ones the public sees. And what investigators reportedly found inside that bedroom may have been her most private attempt to express those feelings. Yet at the same time, Anne's public life showed no clear signal to viewers that anything was wrong. She had continued working, continued appearing, continued being to the outside world the Anne everyone recognized, which reveals something both powerful and difficult to understand: the difference between public strength and private vulnerability. And this is where the story becomes less about one moment and more about the life she built leading up to it. Because Anne Burrell's journey didn't begin with television. It began years earlier in professional kitchens, long before cameras were ever involved. And the path she took to become one of the most recognizable culinary personalities on television was anything but accidental. But long before television audiences knew her name, Anne Burrell was focused on something far more demanding than fame. She was focused on mastery. Her culinary journey began with formal training at the prestigious Culinary Institute of America, one of the most respected culinary schools in the world. It was an environment known for discipline, precision, and relentless standards. Students there weren't taught how to be celebrities. They were taught how to survive professional kitchens, and Anne thrived in that environment. She didn't just learn recipes, she learned structure, resilience, and consistency, qualities that would later define her presence on screen. But her education didn't stop there. She continued her training in Italy, studying at the Italian Culinary Institute for Foreigners, where she immersed herself in traditional techniques and authentic regional cooking. Italy wasn't just another step in her career, it shaped her identity as a chef. The philosophy she embraced there, respect for ingredients, simplicity, and confidence, would later become part of her unmistakable teaching style. And when she returned to New York, she entered one of the toughest culinary scenes in the world. Professional kitchens in New York City demand speed, precision, and emotional endurance. Mistakes are visible. Pressure is constant. But Anne didn't step back. She stepped forward. She worked in respected restaurants, including under acclaimed chef Lidia Bastianich, gaining first-hand experience in high-performance culinary environments. This phase of her life mattered more than most viewers ever realized, because it built the foundation for everything that came later. Not just her skill, but her confidence. And eventually, that confidence caught the attention of television producers. Her transition to television began behind the scenes, appearing as a sous chef on Iron Chef America. At first, she wasn't the focus. She was part of the team, supporting, preparing, executing. But viewers noticed her energy. She wasn't quiet. She wasn't reserved. She was expressive, passionate, authentic. And authenticity translates powerfully on camera. It wasn't long before she was given her own platform. Her breakout role came with Secrets of a Restaurant Chef, where she taught viewers professional techniques in an approachable way. This wasn't just another cooking show. It was personal. She didn't present perfection. She presented learning. Mistakes were part of the process. Growth was the goal. And audiences connected with that message deeply. But her biggest impact came with Worst Cooks in America. The premise was simple but powerful. Take people with little confidence in the kitchen and help them transform. Not just their cooking, their belief in themselves. Anne's role wasn't just to instruct. It was to guide, encourage, challenge, and sometimes reassure. She became known for pushing contestants beyond their comfort zones, not through criticism, but through belief in their potential. This made her different, because viewers weren't just watching food being prepared, they were watching transformation, and Anne was at the center of it. Which makes what happened years later even harder for many fans to understand. How could someone who gave so much confidence to others be facing private struggles of her own? This is where public life can become complicated, because visibility creates perception, and perception doesn't always reflect reality. To viewers, Anne appeared strong, confident, in control. But the truth is, public figures are human first. They experience pressure, expectations, and emotional complexity, just like anyone else, sometimes even more intensely, because their lives are constantly observed, constantly evaluated, constantly expected to remain consistent. And over time, that pressure can become invisible, but present. According to publicly available reports, investigators reviewing Anne's personal writings believed that they reflected deeply private thoughts. These writings weren't meant for television. They weren't meant for interviews. They were personal. And that distinction matters because it highlights the difference between performance and person. Anne's television presence was real, but it was still one part of her full identity. The private Anne existed beyond the camera, beyond the audience, beyond the expectations. And this is where the emotional weight of the story becomes clearer. Because Anne's life wasn't defined by one moment, it was defined by decades of impact. She helped aspiring chefs believe in themselves. She made professional techniques accessible. She built a connection with audiences that lasted years. And perhaps most importantly, she brought joy into spaces that often feel intimidating. Cooking, for many people, can feel overwhelming. Anne made it feel possible. She removed fear from the process. She replaced it with confidence. And that legacy didn't disappear. It continues through the people she taught, the shows she created, and the viewers she inspired. But there was still one final chapter to understand. Not about the investigation, not about the official findings, but about how her story continues to influence conversations today. Because Anne Burrell's life didn't just leave behind memories, it left behind questions. Not questions about blame, but questions about awareness, about emotional health, about the invisible experiences people carry, even when everything appears strong on the surface. And in the months following her passing, something unexpected began to happen. Her story started to shift from shock to reflection, and from reflection to something deeper. In the weeks and months following the official reports, the conversation surrounding Anne Burrell began to evolve. At first, the focus was on the facts, the timeline, the investigation, the official findings released by authorities. But over time, the focus shifted. People weren't just asking what happened, they were asking what her life meant. Because when someone who has influenced millions is suddenly gone, their absence creates more than silence. It creates reflection. Fans revisited her shows, clips resurfaced online, moments that once felt ordinary suddenly carried new emotional weight. Her laughter in the kitchen, her encouragement to nervous contestants, her confidence when teaching complex techniques. These moments weren't scripted emotions. They were real expressions of who she was in those spaces. And that's what made her connection with audiences lasting. She wasn't distant, she was present, and presence is powerful. But as people revisited those moments, another realization quietly emerged. Public figures often carry invisible responsibilities. They inspire others, they motivate others, they create stability for viewers who rely on familiar voices and familiar faces. And yet, behind that stability, their own emotional world may remain unseen. This isn't unique to Anne. It's part of a broader truth about visibility itself, because public success and private emotional experiences don't always move in the same direction. Someone can be professionally accomplished and still experience deeply personal challenges. Someone can appear confident and still carry private uncertainty. Someone can inspire millions while quietly navigating their own inner thoughts. This doesn't diminish their strength, it highlights their humanity. According to public statements released after her passing, Anne's family described her as someone whose warmth extended far beyond television. They emphasized her role not just as a chef, but as a wife, sister, daughter, and stepmother. Those roles existed beyond cameras, beyond audiences, beyond public perception, and those who knew her personally experienced a version of Anne the public never fully saw. That's true for everyone. Every person has layers, public, private, and deeply personal. Anne's professional legacy, however, remains unmistakable. Her work on Food Network helped shape an era of cooking television that focused not on perfection, but on growth. She helped transform cooking shows into spaces of encouragement rather than intimidation. She made mistakes part of learning. She made improvement feel achievable. And that message extended beyond the kitchen. Because confidence isn't limited to cooking. Confidence applies to life itself, which is why her story continues to resonate, not because of how it ended, but because of how she lived. Because for years, Anne Burrell showed people that transformation was possible, that improvement was possible, that belief in yourself could change outcomes. And that message still exists. It exists in every episode she filmed, every person she mentored, every viewer she encouraged, and perhaps most importantly, it exists in the conversations her story has inspired. Conversations about emotional awareness, about recognizing that strength doesn't always look the same, about understanding that people's inner worlds are often more complex than what appears on the surface. Her story reminds us that public figures are not defined by a single moment. They are defined by their full journey, their contributions, their influence, their impact. And Anne's impact remains undeniable. Anne Burrell's life was a reminder that behind every public success is a private human story, one shaped by ambition, growth, relationships, and personal experiences that audiences may never fully see. Her legacy isn't defined by the final chapter of her story. It's defined by the countless people she inspired to believe in themselves, and her influence continues through her work, her teachings, and the confidence she helped others discover. But Anne's story also raises a deeper question. How does someone rise from the intense pressure of professional kitchens to become one of the most recognizable faces on television? And what moments shaped the personality millions came to know and trust?